51, good pass. Okay, conservative in the left. Don't let it pitch as much as last time. Not bad. Not bad. A little late on the throttle application now. 51 at the exit again. One of these days I'll get 52. Okay, very light braking and really early power here. On the power. Ooh, hit the curb more than I wanted to. 55 again. Okay, let's do west bend like we did last time. Just a touch of the brakes and on the power early. Ooh, too much curb. 55, still a good pass. Okay, flatten the downhill. Little lift. Right on the line, that's the best I've done. Can't use much more road at the exit there, I'll be in the dirt. What are they showing? Okay, not bad. There's a 1.5 in here somewhere. Okay. Now it's tempting to just give up and drag the car into the pit lane, but you have to take care of the car on the way in also. You've got to let the brakes and tires cool down, let the motor temperature drop 20 degrees. If we just bring it in hot, we could literally boil the fluid in the calipers if you brought it in with the discs and calipers red hot. You also want to make sure that even though it's a cool-off lap, you crank your mental attention up as high as possible. A lot of cars have been written off on a cool-off lap. Although it feels slower than you've been going, it's very easy to forget that you're still going over 90 miles an hour. Taking a good look at the water temperature gauge down to, well, it's about 170 now. Maybe it'll get to 165 before we pull in. I haven't used the brakes yet on this lap. I'm trying to let the air go over them and cool them off. Okay, I've got my left hand in the air, letting anybody behind me know I'm heading for the pit lane. I keep the car to the right coming in so that anybody online would pass me on the outside. Okay, again, I want to use very light brakes as I bring the car in and not store up some heat in the pads and calipers. Whew, that was fun. Let's go to Bruce up in the tower. I think he's got more technical stuff to talk about.
Let's first take a look at a graph that will graphically demonstrate the three areas of work that the car can do. One of the first generalizations we made was that the car is capable of braking, turning, and acceleration.
On the horizontal line, we'll graph the car's cornering potential. Let's say that we've tested this particular car and it could give us 1 G of cornering force. We were lucky enough that this car turned right as well as it turned left, so its potential on the left side of the graph is the same. If we wanted, we can use amounts of cornering force anywhere along this red line. Let's take a look at its other capabilities. Let's put its ability to brake on the vertical line. If the car is capable of cornering at about 1 G, it should be capable of braking at 1 G. Again, we have the option to use any portion of its braking ability along the red line, if we want to. We could graph acceleration on the bottom side. In reality, very few cars are powerful enough to accelerate at 1 G. But what about mixing abilities? If we instrument a car and identify all of the different combinations of acceleration and cornering that this car is capable of, we could then plot these on this graph. As the points accumulate, they make up a shape of the bottom half of the circle. This semicircular graph is the beginning of the friction circle. Once again, this graph is a great way of looking at the combination of abilities that the car is capable of. Most race cars brake and corner far better than they accelerate, so the shape of the bottom of this graph is proportional to this ability. In most cases, it's a little flatter along the bottom. Once we've found a line, our next step to going faster is to begin our acceleration as early as we can. If we start accelerating during the corner, we're going to somehow mix the ability of the car to accelerate with its ability to turn. Take a look at a combination here. If we begin putting on the power and accelerating on the way out of the corner, what happens to our cornering force? It decreases. Put on more power and it decreases again. Now, as the cornering force decreases, what is going to happen to the radius of our arc? As we drive out of the corner, the radius of the arc slightly increases. Once we start getting serious about squeezing on the power and carrying speed onto the straightaway, we are going to have to be prepared to unwind the steering wheel slightly as we come off the corner. What about mixing the braking and turning abilities of the car? Let's use the instrumented car again and find all the braking and turning combinations, plot them, and we've completed the friction circle. Let's use the friction circle to follow a car through a trail braking entry into a corner. First, maximum braking. Less than threshold would be lower. At threshold braking, how much cornering force is available? None. But relaxed braking force and cornering potential is created. Relax more braking and we get more cornering force. Following the circle, we see that we have a car that gains cornering force on the way in and loses it on the way out.
Our early concept of a single radius arc through the turns has gotten slightly more complicated. In reality, we have a slightly decreasing radius arc into the corner and a slightly increasing radius arc out. Still, the reference points we found for our turn-in, apex, and track-out by using a single radius are essentially the same. I like the friction circle because it's a great way to visualize how the car approaches its limits. When we were working with Chris Wallach of MRG developing our onboard computer system, we had Chris design in the friction circle as one of the system's primary graphic displays. Now we have the ability to punch in the coordinates of a corner we want and follow the car through the braking zone and into the corner. This driver is not perfectly straight when he's braking, although his braking level is quite good. He's doing a very, very good job of trail braking. He's got the car pretty close to the limit in cornering and right on the limit in acceleration and turning on the exit. Excellent job.
So far, we've been building our racing knowledge using all-out rear-wheel drive cars on dry pavement, the perfect conditions. But let's for a bit go past the basics to two special cases, front-wheel drive cars and soaking wet racetracks. How do we adapt to these special situations? Let's start by looking at front-wheel drive and go up to the skid pad.
Hi, I'm Terry Yearwood, and I have the privilege today of talking about a front-drive race car, or front-drive street car. I've been fortunate this year to run in the Firestone Firehawk Endurance Series in a Dodge Shelby, which we won several races in. We found early in the season, though, you had to treat a front-drive car a little differently than a rear-drive. Going back to, or discussing hand position versus right foot position, when we're talking about the brake pedal and we're into a threshold brake mode, if you ask the hands to turn the front tires, you'll begin sliding the front tires. That's why we're beginning to the term of trail braking, where the more you turn your hands, the less you can afford to apply brake pressure so you don't lock the front tires. A common mistake is to leap out of the brakes prematurely, ask the car to turn, and want to go to horsepower simultaneously. That just smokes the front tires. There's no traction available, and the car understeers or power understeers all the way to the exit with no exit speed. However, if we can work out something in the front drive car to make the rear point not smoke the front tires, we can actually dial some steering out of the vehicle, and the less we have to steer, the more the right foot can press on the horsepower. In the case of an autocross or a street car where we need to really turn the vehicle, without any modification, we actually can use the handbrake or the emergency brake. The emergency brake puts a little rear brake bias in the car. The rear begins to slide or point, and the more the rear points, the more power available. In the road race car, we're able to put a little negative camber in the front tires by tucking the front tires in at the top. That helps the front end point. You can also combine that with a little bit of toe out at the rear of the car. Toe out means we take the rear tires and actually point them away from each other. So as you begin to turn the car in with the steering wheel, the rear tires act like a trailer, and they actually begin to point the vehicle in down to the apex. The more the rear can point, the less you have to steer the car, the more power is available. A big plus in a front drive car, especially in an autocross or a racetrack situation, is once you begin to slide the rear, if you have made a mistake and over-rotated the car, the rear end's coming around more than you really like to, you actually can dial in your steering input like a rear drive car, but the big plus here is you can actually begin to squeeze back some power, and the front end will tug itself back straight. Just be sure you aim the tires where you'd like the car to go, and just squeeze back on the power, and the front end can pull itself out of the skid as opposed to a rear drive car. All right, let's recap the front drive car. Number one, be extremely patient with your throttle foot. Don't ask it to power until you've gotten your hand some semblance of straight. Otherwise, you're going to frustrate yourself with power understeer. Secondly, let's fix the car, if possible, where it can help point. In other words, a little bit of toe out at the rear, a little rear brake bias, possibly even just adjusting tire pressures. A little more in the front than you have in the rear can help a car rotate or point without a whole lot of expense. And if you do get the car over-rotated, if the rear end really wants to come around with you, dial your steering correction in, and in the front drive car, you can squeeze back on a bit of power, and the front end can actually begin to tug itself back straight.
Race morning's always a nervous time. Drivers with years of experience can't shake the butterflies. You try to be calm, but it's nearly impossible, especially if it's your first